G'day guys, welcome to part 2 of the little soccer mum car builds. We're back in the shed today, and as you can see, I've got my work cut out for me. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I need to put on this car before I actually take off on the road, and it's getting down to crunch time. In fact, we're only a couple of weeks away until we actually hit the road and take off. And by the time you're watching this, I'm probably halfway through the Cape or something like that, which you'll be able to see eventually. But as I said, very limited time, so much to do. I'm gonna talk you through each part as I'm putting it on, so don't worry, just grab yourself a beer, kick back and relax and watch me do all the hard work. Now that was an absolute nightmare getting that first rotor off. Fingers crossed the other side's a bit easier, but just wanted to show you real quick. Pretty important when you're doing suspension like this, if you're not replacing certain components, make sure all your bushes and everything else that you're not replacing is still in good nick. They look pretty good, nothing to worry about there. But this whole strut tower is going to come out, put the new one in, have a cool lift kit. Okay, so after much persuasion, the first strut is finally out. Now, I say much persuasion because, first of all, the rotor was seized onto the hub. Then the ball joint didn't want to separate from the upper control arm, but a little persuasion from the hammer went a long way and got those both sorted. I had to take the sway bar out as well, which was probably the easiest thing about all of this. But the cool thing about this is I'm in my own shed here. I'm learning how everything in the front end of the Prado works. And that way, if something does go wrong on the side of the road, up the PDR in the Cape, for example, I'll know exactly how to remove everything the most efficient way and put it back together again, if I can repair it, that is. Okay, so as I said at the beginning of this video, I'm quite short on time. So you might notice behind me over here, we've got my younger brother, Jeremy. He's not as handsome as me, I might add, but he's pretty good on the tools. So he's the right man for the job, and we need to get this done quick. So he's here to help. Now a little bit more on Jeremy. He's been pulling things apart since he was a little kid, and he's got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to working on cars. So I'm so glad I've got him on deck here because it's going to cut my time literally in half. Okay, so we've got the old suspension out, as you can see, and we're ready to put the new stuff back in. So I'm super stoked. It's coming all together. This is really exciting. But before I do, I want to show you what I've got and why I've got it. So I hit up the guys at GSA for some Oztech suspension. Now you might notice that these guys are the same guys that designed the suspension in the MT1 camper trailers. Now we've been running those for a couple of years now. I trust them completely. They're absolute legends up there, and they were able to completely customize this kit to suit my car. Now starting with the front struts, the first thing you'll notice is how thick the bore on the shock is. It's almost twice the size of the original, which means there's more oil inside, which means it's going to be cooler for longer, which is an absolute must-have when you're doing big Ks on rough tracks. The other benefit of upgrading your suspension is brand new bushings on your shocks. As you can see from the old ones, they've seen a few Ks. Now in terms of the spring setup, the guys at GSA recommended these ones in particular. Now these are rated to carry a steel bull bar and a winch, plus a little bit extra on the front end, which is absolutely perfect for my setup. Now moving on to the rear shocks, and you'll see the same thing, just how thick the aftermarket model is compared to the original. Again, more oil, it's going to be cooler for longer. It's going to be an absolute blessing on the PDR or the Gibb River Road. Now with the rear spring setup, I've gone with a constant load of about 200 kilos, plus they've thrown in some heavy duty airbags, which will help cope with the weight that I've got in the back of the car here. With the suspension in, we can now move on to the rotors. Now my original rotors were actually not too bad. They were in pretty good condition, same thing with the pads, but this is a pretty big trip, so I'm just gonna go ahead and replace them while I'm at it. And again, going back to what I said earlier about pulling things apart and putting them back together again so you know how everything works, this is a great way to do it. So you might be wondering why I'm going through all the effort of replacing the radiator. Well, the reason for that is I've got a very slight leak in the original one. It is very small, but I'm not taking any chances. So if you spot anything like that before a big trip like this, it's definitely worth replacing the whole thing. Definitely fork out the money before you go to the Cape or something like that, because shipping parts up there could be very expensive. So just going with a brand new one, chuck it in and we'll be sweet. So when I said I had a small radiator leak, it was actually a bit worse than I thought. So it just goes to show you, if you see something, do something about it, because that is not good at all. I'm so glad that I pulled this off when I did, because that would have been a nightmare. You can probably notice that the previous owner has used some radiator stop leak or something like that, which is no big deal, but it's not ideal at the same time. But just to show why it pays to pull things apart before you hit the road. And the other cool thing is what I touched on earlier, is the fact that, I don't know where it is, but I've got the fan off. So if something does go wrong, one of the things I'm gonna take with me as a spare is the viscous fan hub. So now you know exactly how to take it off, put it all back together again. Okay, I'm on to probably the most nerve-wracking part about this entire process, and that is drilling a 95mm hole saw through the side of my guard here to fit the snorkel. Okay, so damage assessment came up pretty good, considering how nervous I was. The next thing I need to do is a bit of touch-up paint on all these holes that I've just drilled, because otherwise it's going to cause rust. Now, for those of you who are tossing up whether or not you might need a snorkel, this is exactly why I went out and got one. One, if you think you're going to run into water crossings, this is an absolute must-have, because it'll put your intake point a lot higher than the wading depth of the car. And two, they're also a great way to keep dust intake to an absolute minimum, because again, the intake point is way up high. As you can see, Jeremy's been plugging away with the winch cradle. Now that that's on, we can mount the Dominator Extreme winch. Now, we've been flogging these winches on countless trips now, and they've always stood the test of time, so it was a no-brainer for me. G'day guys, another quick interruption here. We're gonna offer another 10% off discount. So if you're building a car like this, I know how much that'll help you guys out. The money that you save on our camping gear can go towards your suspension or your tires or whatever it might be to build your dream rig. So use that 10% off to go nuts. Okay, so we're on to day 2. We got a fair bit done yesterday. The bull bar's pretty much ready to go on, but before we do, we're gonna whack the new radiator in. I've replaced all the belts as well. It's a hot tip. If you're gonna do something like this, go ahead and replace the belts while you're at it. Keep the old ones as spares. I've also got new radiator hoses to chuck on. So we're gonna drop this in, bull bar's gonna go in, and we're getting closer to being done. It's getting pretty exciting. So we are on to the final piece of the puzzle, which is the bull bar. Now this particular bar I picked up secondhand for about 1,200 bucks from a wrecker. In hindsight, I probably should have gotten just a brand new one, because by the time I got this sandblasted and powder coated and all the rest of that, it cost almost the same as getting a new one. So I thought I'd save money there, but I didn't really save too much. But as you can see, I'm running the two 7-inch lethal lights from Adventure Kings. They are absolutely unreal. I've had these on my pad for a couple of years now, or probably about 18 months or so, and I absolutely love them, as well as the 30-inch light bar. Now this is going to give me an awesome amount of throw out to long distances, but also this 30-inch light bar is going to give me heaps of spread out to the sides, which is exactly what I need for looking out for wildlife and stuff like that. And to make things easier, of course, I've put the light bar and the lights on before we're putting the bull bar on. Speed things up a little bit. Okay, so the pre-filter is in, and I want to give you a couple of reasons as to why I went out and got one. It's not 100% necessary or anything like that, but there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one is to protect your injector pump and your engine from dirty fuel. Now, when you're filling up in remote locations at servos and stuff like that, the fuel quality can be a little bit questionable. So this is a really good way to safeguard all of that. It also stops water, which brings me to my next point, is when you're doing a lot of river crossings, especially up in the top end in the Cape there, a lot of people will go through the effort of putting diff breathers on, but they forget to put a fuel tank breather on. Now that is one thing that is very important. I'm definitely going to do that, but in case any water from those water crossings get into my fuel tank, this is going to pick it up and I'll be able to drain it out before it goes into my engine. With the car all back together, I'm going to do a full service with high quality oils and filters all around to make sure it's tip top on this trip. Okay, after a solid 2 days of hard work from Jeremy and I, it's pretty much done. I've still got a couple of little bits and pieces to do, but it's looking absolutely insane. This bull bar came up an absolute treat. The suspension looks great. It really changed the entire look of the car, but it's also gonna make it perform incredibly well out in the bush. But there's one more thing that I need to do, and that is go and get a wheel alignment. If you're putting aftermarket suspension in, make sure you get a wheel alignment straight away. So this is why it's so important to go get a wheel alignment done when you put a lift kit in a vehicle, especially with an IFS vehicle. Now, I'm no expert, of course, but red generally means bad, and all these numbers here, they don't look good. You can see how far out absolutely everything is, but the boys are working on it now, so once it's done, it'll be way safer on the road, it'll dry better, and also the tire wear will be nice and even, which is exactly what we're after. Righto, so the wheel alignment is being done, which brings this episode to an end, but the next time you see me, I'll be out in the bush, and I'll give you guys a full walk around of the entire car, each and every single part that I've added to it, and a breakdown of the costs involved, just to give you guys an idea of what the budget was that I went for on this trip. Can't wait to see you next time, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.